Welcome back to Halloween in July, Banshees and Ghouls. Today we've got a little something more avant-garde for you with Layers of Fear. Before we get into the oil-based spookies though, let's talk about the big special we're running right now on Patreon. During Halloween in July, anyone who makes a pledge of $5 or more gets a special spooky card sent to them to commemorate our summer of constant terror. And to help you hit that goal, we've slashed prices on yearly pledges as low as they'll go. Pledge yearly and you'll get 2 months for free. So today we'll be brushing up on the Layers of Fear series, covering both the 2016 original and 2019's Layers of Fear 2. Layers of Fear follows an unnamed protagonist as he tries to complete his magnum opus, which entails him adding layers to a painting which are shaped by your choices. Later on in Layers of Fear 2, we play an unnamed actor who has been hired by Nightmare Sander Cohen to do some insane film project that requires a very layered character. Both games are exploration focused and have a lot of focus on scrutinizing past trauma and going completely nuts thanks to trying to suppress it. Spooky hijinks ensue. The Layers of Fear series is made by Polish developer Bloober team, which was founded in 2010. They made a healthy amount of games from 2010 to 2015, but nothing really got them any serious attention until Layers of Fear in 2016, and then they had a proper double whammy with Observer next year. They went quiet on releases for a couple years until they dropped that one Blair Witch game that's been sitting in my library unplayed for a while now, and then Layers of Fear 2 in 2019. Looking back at Bloober's catalog, it seems like they really hit their stride once they started doing short, visually focused horror titles, and in all honesty, good for them. While I have no experience on the development side of video games, I can attest that it's very important to find your niche if you want to grow as a creator. So first, we've got Layers of Fear. Layers of Fear has you returning to your old home after some sort of hearing that didn't go over too well, and now you need to get back to your work. What is your work? Well, you were once a revered and now disgraced painter who lost his creative spark and now must try to recapture it if you want to, well, do anything really. Based on the condition of your house and the situation, it's looking pretty dire. The protagonist is never named and only referred to as the husband, according to the game's IMDb. And he is also voiced by a Viking that will read you relaxing bedtime stories on the Calm app. They're quite nice. So the gameplay in Layers of Fear is essentially to make your way through a warped version of your home in order to find various elements of your magnum opus and complete the painting layer by layer, hence the name. This is going to be easier said than done as your delusions are getting pretty intense the further into your house you go. You'll start to get an idea of what went down as you look for, painting supplies, but that's if you can make it to wherever the heck you put them. So the first major element of getting around the house is exploring. Well, exploring in a more linear sense. There are different paths that you can take to affect which ending you get once you finish the painting, but for the most part it's a straight shot, or as straight as this ever-shifting mansion can be. There's a lot of opening doors and looking through closets, searching for various drawings and mementos that you or maybe possibly someone else left behind. Some mementos will trigger memories that can range from hearing a conversation to even triggering an entire scene change. So something else that you should know about how Layers of Fear plays is that you can't really die. Sorta. There is an enemy that you'll encounter here and there, but if she gets you, it's not a checkpoint reload. You see, interacting with this character is a choice that you can make, and she is easily avoided for the most part as long as you have your wits about you. If she does get you, you'll be loaded into a new path inside the house that represents something that we'll get to sooner or later. On top of the gameplay elements, we've got what we're here for, the spookies. Layers of Fear certainly has a whole lot of the spookies, but they vary in type and level of octane. The first, and what I think is the best spooky element of Layers of Fear, is the level design, and whoever worked on these seamless transitions in this game knocked it out of the park, with not only unsettling the player, but also conveying the state of delirium that the husband is currently in. You'll walk into a room and when you turn around, suddenly the door you just came through isn't there anymore. And then when you turn back around again, the layout of the room has completely changed, and they used it so much and to such great effect. I just love this. That brings us to the second element of the spookies, the sense of the husband's delirium getting worse as the story progresses. As you go deeper into the house, the world gets more and more twisted and starts to resemble a bunch of what I can assume is some kind of paint waste, and the house is getting more and more macabre, much like the later works of the husband after the incident. Some of this stuff can get really unsettling, and as an added bonus, Bloober went and found IRL paintings of the same nature to help it all fit in. Even from the beginning of the game, it's very clear that the husband isn't mentally well, and that the majority of this is his own delusion of some sort as you get closer and closer to finishing this painting. And some of these flashbacks get pretty wild too. And unfortunately, that brings us to the last part of Layers of Fear's spooky offerings. the jump scares. Layers of Fear has a whole lot of them, and while some of them will get you, they also have that effect where at a certain point there's so many of them that you start bracing yourself and the effect is diminished. Towards the end of the game, it gets a bit better as the devs likely figured out that it's probably best to leave some space in between scares in order to let the player reset themselves, but there's still a whole lot of stuff just suddenly moving and making loud banging noises in this game, followed by musical stings. Now let's try and take a moment to untangle this story. It's not really told in that much of a clear, linear fashion, and you'll have to read between a lot of the delirious lines if you want to sort it out for yourself in-game. By the way, we're now going into spoilers for Layer of Fear, so skip ahead to the timestamp if you want to learn all this for yourself. The husband, who you play as, is a classically styled artist who specializes in portraits and the like. He meets his wife, who becomes his artistic muse, and the two live a happy life with their child for a time. After an incident that happened to the wife, the husband starts acting erratically and develops a severe phobia of rats. This continues to get worse and worse until the husband is financially ruined, what's left of the family is separated for the health and safety of their daughter, and the husband is utterly disconnected to the reality. So what exactly happened to the wife? Well, early on in the game, you pick up a newspaper clipping that alludes to a fire that happened at the department store that led to many deaths and many more injuries. It would seem that the wife was one of those injured, and her face was left heavily disfigured by burns from the fire. This sets the husband off, as on top of the harm done to his wife, he feels he has lost his muse and no longer looks at her the same, as now she also has outbursts as a result of nerve damage from the fire. The husband goes on a search for any doctor that might be able to repair her skin, but after at least 16 different doctors, he's met with a same answer: there's nothing they can do. This sends the husband into a delirious rage as he feels that his muse is gone for good now, and after a run of paintings that he does that are so bad that the local news do articles on them to talk about just how bad they are, he refuses to so much as touch or talk to his wife, and instead preferring the company of alcohol. Things were already pretty bad in the household before all of this, as the wife had previously left him and taken their daughter before the fire, but after the fire, the wife was left wheelchair bound and she had no choice but to move back in with the husband for a time. Now for the events of the story. Unfortunately, things were so bad for the wife that she was driven to do something that I can't really talk about on YouTube due to content guidelines, which pushes the husband over the edge and into his current state where he can no longer discern reality from delusion. In some fit of mania, the husband decides that the best way to immortalize his wife, as he wants to remember her anyway, is through a painting that is created with her remains. The events of the game are the husband wandering through the house to collect parts of his wife's body in order to use them as materials to create the painting. Depending on the choices you make, you'll either get a painting of the wife, which starts to warp in the husband's mind, forcing him to throw it away among dozens of other attempts at painting her, or the husband will make a self-portrait that goes on to be well received and signals his return to the good graces of the art community, or he'll make a painting of his wife and daughter before throwing himself on a pile of reject paintings that is on fire. After the main story comes the Inheritance DLC, where you play as the daughter all grown up, and returning to the house to collect her inheritance. Aside from confirming a canon ending, Inheritance is mostly about the daughter reliving the events of the destruction of the family through her own perspective. Turns out the dog Daddy Dearest got her wasn't so much a fun and loving companion for the daughter, but more of a constant source of terror. The daughter goes from room to room, reliving her memories of her mother and father, in which she can choose through her actions how she wants to remember them, and that will lead to her inheritance at the end of the DLC. Before we get into Layers of Fear 2, let's take a sec to give some love to this video's sponsor, Ekster. Ekster designs the most efficient smart wallets in the world, and they're currently running a special end of summer sale on all their cool wallets like the Sleek Parliament Classic, which as you can see here is less than half the size of my old billfold and fits all the cards you could possibly need, plus a nice little cash loop for all your tipping needs. Seriously though, it's 2021. Stop carrying around 50 club cards and get a QR code on your phone. And if that wasn't sleek enough for you, they've got the aluminum card holders like this one here in graphite. These wallets also have these neat little card ejector buttons on them, which saves you a lot of hassle of trying to wiggle out cards that just won't come out, and personally I can't stop playing with them for some reason. Best of all is their solar powered tracker that fits right into a credit card slot and took me hardly 2 minutes to go from manually searching the app to having the whole thing set up on my phone. The best part about this tracker in my opinion is not only is it great at tracking wherever you put your wallet and will even alert you if you're leaving your home without it, but it also works in reverse too. If you ever lose your phone but still have your wallet handy, you can double tap the tracker card and it'll wake up your phone and start playing a little jingle to help you find it. Use the link in the description below, ekster.com/charlatan, to check out all their cool wallets they have on offer and get your solar powered tracker today. 3 years later, in 2019, we got the sequel to Layers of Fear in Layers of Fear 2. Layers of Fear 2 isn't really a direct sequel to the events of the first game, or even really related to the events of the first game, but instead seems to be a new take on the idea of having layers of fear in your psyche. This time around, you play as a down-on-his-luck actor who's sent off to an old ocean liner in order to play a part for an eccentric but very renowned director. There's a lot of talk about building a character in some really weird way, and of course, the spookies ensue. Layers of Fear 2 is certainly an evolution of the first game, and you can tell that Bloober team had some time to try and build out what they wanted to do with the first game. It probably helps that by this time they decided that they were going to be a spooky game studio, and now that they had a wheelhouse to be in, they could apply what they learned from one game to the next one. So the first thing I'd say about this is while a lot of things are improved in Layers of Fear 2, there are some things that are worse off than in the first game. I certainly say the good outweighs the bad in this case, and it's more of a scenario of 2 steps forward and 1 step back, as opposed to the other way around. I'll just go over the mechanics that I think are a step backwards real quick before getting into all the new stuff, as I don't want to downplay all the improvements that have been made here. The main issue I have was that a lot of the interaction controls feel considerably worse than they did in the first game, at least with a mouse. This might have something to do with trying to directly translate what they were doing with the first game over to a new engine, as the first Layers of Fear is on Unity, and this game is now on Unreal. Also, there's a lot less of those crazy transitions that you saw in the first game, but they're still there. It's just a bummer that there's not as much of them anymore, as that was something that really made the first game stand out. The biggest improvements to Layers of Fear 2 is that there are now things to do in actual threats. You're prompted at the beginning of each playthrough to see if you want the monsters to actually be able to get you, but come on. Where's the horror if there's no sense of danger? Bloober also added real puzzles into Layer of Fear 2, and not just stuff that Layers of Fear the first had, which was essentially the 3D equivalent of pixel hunting for a switch or an item in 90s adventure games, in the form of scanning every inch of a room looking for whatever you need to interact with in order to reveal a code to a lock or something. Now we've got stuff that requires a bit of brain power, and now that the monster is here and able to kill you if you don't act quickly, there's a lot more tension room to room in Layers of Fear 2. On top of the puzzles and monsters, there are collectibles now. These primarily take the form of movie posters that the actors starred in, as well as phonograph interviews with the child you keep seeing. But there are a few other odds and ends in the game that you might find as you wander through the ocean liner. It's nice to have a reason to explore the levels as opposed to just looking for the thing that gets you to the next area. Layers of Fear did have collectibles in the form of those rat drawings, but Layers of Fear 2 certainly does a better job at hiding collectibles for you to find in a more interesting and diverse way. Finally, what is likely the best thing they added: New Game Plus mode. After you complete the game once, you'll be allowed to start a New Game Plus that has you go through a much shorter version of the intro before you're placed back into the stateroom where the actor rests between layers. All the collectibles you previously found are still here, and you have the luxury of going into the screening room and being able to start any of the levels in any order you'd like so that you can focus on finding the remaining collectibles or making new choices you want in pursuit of a different ending. I prefer this 1,000 times over any other game that makes you play through the entire thing over again just to experience a few key choices that get you a different ending. So about them spookies, or perhaps the lack thereof. Well, I'll certainly give it that Layers of Fear still has the same kind of foreboding atmosphere featuring delirium that the first game had, and they're taking the high road and not doing jump scares this time around. Layers of Fear 2 feels far less scary than the first game, even with a monster chasing you around that can and will kill you. And I think it's for reasons that I'll get into now with the story elements. So, about those story elements. First and foremost, you play as an actor. You're known for being really good in a bunch of movies, but lately your personal life has caused you to leave the spotlight due to your inability to get work stemming from your mental health issues. Then one day your agent writes you and says that you need to go off to this old ocean liner because a very famous director wants you to build a character for a production. Okay then, I guess that's just what we'll do. So the actor wakes up in the stateroom and he's greeted by the voice of a director who talks like if Sandra Cohen decided to rinse his mouth in glass for a few weeks as some sort of performative art piece. It would seem that the building the character involves going into various parts of the ship that take the form of strange memories from your own acting career and that of a child who lived aboard a ship as a stowaway with his sister. These are clearly the layers of the character that the actor had been asked was building, and the completion of each level, the movie reel that plays will have a new piece of the mannequin added to the frame, and the character is further built upon, so to speak. This is all fine and good for the most part, but unfortunately the story starts to drag after the start of the fourth reel or so, and much like your agent said in a letter to you, the director seems to be getting a little too artsy-fartsy artsy with this thing, and you kind of just want to get it over with at a certain point. It doesn't help that that stowaway child somehow always manages to get even whinier than the last time you heard him, and it gets really grating. I get that all the things that happen to him are very traumatic, but at times it feels like the usual foibles of having a child actor where it clearly just sounds like a child repeating something an adult told them to say instead of acting and reacting, and it just comes off as weird and annoying. Alrighty, spoiler time again. So what actually happened here? Well, if it wasn't clear already, the children in the flashbacks are you, which will make sense in a second. Your mother died shortly after your birth, which led to your father being devastated even more so than he already was, losing an eye in World War I. He ends up being a pretty mean and neglectful father to the boy and the girl, and the only solace is that you can sneak into the movie theater he runs and watch this cool pirate movie over and over again. One day, the boy and his sister have enough and they run away. They stow away on an ocean liner and they play pretend as pirates, but you find it's pretty hard living as you need to steal food from the crew to survive, and the security team is aware of this and are taking increasingly intense measures to make sure whoever's stealing the rations stops. This all comes to a head when eventually you're spotted, and after one thing leads to another, there's a big fire on the ship and the boy and his sister are separated. It's pretty vague as to if the boy or the sister survived, but you grow up to become an actor renowned for their ability to become the character they're portraying on the screen. This of course comes at the cost of you using this method acting to try and help repress the traumas of your childhood, which is wearing away at your sanity. This is actually reflected in the movie posters you pick up, where the character plays more and more deranged roles, with a final poster you collect that isn't just pure delirium being for King Lear, which is about an aging monarch who knows that his mental faculties are fading and must divvy up his kingdom between his daughters before it's too late for him. It's a Shakespearean tragedy, so nothing goes well for anyone, and this is now like the second time all those semesters in theater class have been useful in my adult life. So the endings are all based on what choices you made during certain points in the story. If you followed all the director's orders, or refused them all, it'll be revealed that you were either the boy James or the girl Lily, which you might have noticed that all the memories played back when you collected posters had both female and male voices in them. If you didn't do all the choices one way or another, the director will berate you for having no identity anymore and you'll be kicked to New Game Plus. The end. So one of my main thoughts on both of these games is that they are really short, like even for horror games. The main story in Layers of Fear didn't even take me 3 hours to get through, and with the Inheritance DLC, it comes to just barely 3.5 hours. Layers of Fear 2 fares a little longer, with it being 3.5 hours without a story DLC, and it helps the case that New Game Plus mode is available, which makes going back into the game to find collectibles and experience different endings a much more appealing option than in the first game, which requires you to play the whole thing over again. If you're wondering why this video's runtime might be a little shorter than my usual videos, now you know why. Both these games certainly have a lot to offer visually, and the story value to them is great, but there's not a lot of gaminess in them in a traditional sense, which at least to me discourages me from playing again to get different endings, because I know that the majority of the stuff I'll experience will be exactly the same as the last time. It doesn't help that the spookies are hit and miss. Between the first game's over-reliance on jump scares and the second game being just sort of bleh, sometimes it just doesn't do it for you. The games certainly have plenty of atmospheric spookies, and the first game excels at using those sudden level transitions to disorient the player and convey the delirium that the husband is experiencing, but when compared to other titles that cost the same or even less than Layers of Fear games do, perhaps the bar has been raised a little too high lately as to what we get out of a small horror game. I won't go as far as to call these games walking simulators though. There's more than enough interactivity and player agency in both games to avoid that title, and that would be a disservice to all the work that Bloober put into both these games. It's definitely not the kind of horror gameplay you'd expect from, say, a Cry of Fear or even one of the Outlast games, but there's certainly something to do in both of these games. If I had to give a recommendation one way or another, I'd say that if you're interested in these, pick them up on a steep discount, like really steep. With the DLC bundled into Layers of Fear, it comes to $22 or just $20 if you want to get the base game alone, and that's for 3 hours of original experience, and then maybe up to like 8 if you want to repeatedly replay them to collect all the things and get all the endings. Layers of Fear 2 is a little longer, but still costs $20. I don't want to be too harsh here, but there's a reason why this series is here and not an indie ween where we try to get the best bang for our buck. So up next, we're going to take ourselves a little trip into the zone, and then after that, who knows? I certainly don't from the previous videos, as I ended up reordering the lineup so that this series ends on a much stronger note. Make sure you head over to patreon.com/charlatanwonder to get in on the Halloween in July special and get your extra special spooky card before it's too late. In the meantime, stay safe, stay indoors, wash your hands, and enjoy this cat video. Saucy boy, let me just get rid of that. What are you doing under the bubble wrap? I know this is not the best place for it. But I've got to pack more stuff because we're going to get out of this place soon. We decided it's not a very nice place because we too are very upset with all the fire alarms. Mommy's just making a snack for herself. She made you a snack too. It's just like the front of you's covered. What are you doing?
Thinks he can be saved from me.
Why are you hiding from Mommy? Would you like a scritch? He's like just nestled between the tissue box and the bubble wrap. You're a silly one, you know that?